In March 2021, one container ship turned sideways in a canal in Egypt and blocked the route that carries more than a fifth of the world's container trade. It was on every front page on Earth. It lasted about 6 days. 3 years later, the same canal was open, fully operational, staffed, dredged, taking bookings, charging tolls. And its traffic fell by more than 40%. Its revenue fell by about the same, for a year. Almost nobody covered the second one, which is strange because the second one was larger, longer, and cost far more money. The ship was the version of this story with a photograph. So this season is about choke points. And the first thing we have to fix is the assumption that closing one is the disaster. This is the Rise Index. Season 1 asked one question 8 ways. Where does economic power actually move? It answered with countries. This season asks the identical question and answers with places instead. 8 of them, narrow ones. And it starts here because the Suez Canal is the easiest one to picture. 2 seas, 1 ditch, no mystery. Although by the end of this episode, the canal will turn out to be the least important thing in its own story, and the reason for that is sitting about 1,000 miles further south. We are going to keep coming back to it. 3 numbers to hold, and the first one needs care because it is quoted far more often than it is defined. You will hear that the canal carries about 12% of world trade. When the United Nations actually published the breakdown for 2023, that single number came apart into several, and they are not close to each other. Containers. 22% of the world's seaborne container trade went through the canal. Liquefied natural gas, 10%. Oil tankers, 9%. Bulk carriers, the ships that move grain and ore and coal, 4%. So there is no such thing as the canal's share. There is a share for every kind of cargo, and they run from 4 to 22, which already tells you who was about to be hurt and who was not. If your goods travel in a box, this waterway is most of your world. If they travel as bulk grain, it is a rounding error. The second, there is no alternative route at anything like the same scale. A ship that will not use the canal sails around the southern tip of Africa, and that adds thousands of miles to the voyage. The third number is the one that makes this episode. The canal charges a toll. The detour costs money. Both are prices in the same currency for the same journey, which sets up the finding this whole season is going to run on. A choke point's power is not how much crosses it. It is the gap between those two prices. And that gap can close while the choke point stays wide open. One piece of vocabulary before we start, borrowed from last season and useful in about 4 minutes. File 1 of Season 1 was about semiconductors, and it landed on a definition that has held up. A choke point is not what you produce a lot of, it is what somebody else cannot start producing quickly. Hold that sentence. It is correct. It is the definition this channel has used for a year, and the Suez Canal is about to demonstrate that it is missing something important. The obvious answer, the one almost every account of this subject runs on, is that a choke point is dangerous because it can be blocked. Physically. 1 ship, 1 accident, 1 bad afternoon. And that answer has real evidence behind it, which is why it is so durable. Let us give it its best case. The Suez Canal opened in 1869 under a project led by Ferdinand de Lesseps. It connects the Mediterranean to the Red Sea, and it has an unusual physical property that matters more than anything else about it. It has no locks. The 2 seas sit at close enough to the same level that ships simply sail through at sea level the whole way. Compare the Panama Canal, which lifts every vessel over a continental divide using locks and fresh water, and is therefore constrained by machinery and by rainfall. Suez has neither constraint. What limits it instead is geometry. How wide the channel is, how deep, how big the ships have become, and how you organize convoys through a passage that for much of its length runs one way at a time. Egypt widened part of it in 2015, adding a parallel lane along one section so ships could pass in both directions there. Throughput rose. The choke point did not disappear. Doubling one stretch of a one-way road does not make it a two-way road. So, in March 2021, when a very large container ship, one of the biggest afloat, went aground across the channel, the geometry did exactly what geometry does. The canal stopped. Hundreds of ships queued at both ends. And then the interesting thing happened, which is the part that got left out of the coverage. The system recovered. Quickly. Almost as if it had been built to. The ship was refloated in about 6 days. The backlog cleared over the following days. Freight rates were violent that year, but the honest reading is that they were violent because of a pandemic and because ports were jammed, not because of one grounding. A canal blockage that lasts under a week is absorbed by an industry that already plans in weeks. That is the obvious answer. Test it. Blocking a choke point is dramatic, photogenic, expensive, and comparatively survivable. Now the version without a photograph. From late 2023 and through 2024, security risk in the southern Red Sea rose enough that most of the large container lines stopped sending ships that way. They rerouted the Asia to Europe trade around the Cape of Good Hope. Note carefully what did not happen. The canal was not blocked, it was not damaged, it was not closed by anybody. It sat there, open, dredged, fully staffed, quoting tolls to customers who had decided to buy the alternative instead. And it was not spread evenly. Container tonnage crossing the canal fell furthest by far, by more than 80% in the worst weeks of early 2024. The boxes left first. And here is the mechanism nobody puts on the map. The risk was not at the canal. To reach Suez from Asia, a ship must first pass the Bab al-Mandab Strait between the Arabian Peninsula and the Horn of Africa, and then run the length of the Red Sea. The canal is the northern gate. Bab al-Mandab is the southern one. They are two choke points on the same route, in series, which means you can make a choke point useless without touching it. The Suez Canal in 2024 performed perfectly and still lost most of its customers, because the corridor it sits inside had a problem somewhere else entirely. So, the definition from File 1 needs an amendment. Replacement time. What somebody else cannot start producing or building quickly. Nobody can dig a second Suez in a decade, so by that test the canal scores as high as anything on Earth, and it still lost more than 40% of its traffic in a year. Replacement was never required, only rerouting. That is a real hole in the framework, and it is worth being precise about where it is. Replacement time tells you how hard the thing is to rebuild. It says nothing at all about how hard it is to avoid. Those are different questions, and the second one turns out to be the one that gets answered in practice, which is the anchor for this whole season, so it gets a name. The toll and the detour. Every choke point has a price for using it and a price for going around it. Its power is the distance between those two numbers and nothing else. And the gap can close from either side. The toll can rise, the detour can get cheaper. Or, as in 2024, the toll stays exactly where it is, while the real cost of the route acquires a risk premium that appears on no invoice. Physical closure changes the toll to infinity for a few days. Risk changes the effective toll for a year, and does it without a single photograph. So who actually paid? Not in aggregate, in order. And the order is the interesting part, because it runs almost exactly backwards from the one most people would guess. The party everybody names first turns out to be sixth. Start on a ship. It is early 2024. A container vessel is somewhere in the Indian Ocean bound for Northern Europe, and the routing instruction changes while she is already at sea. The crew do not reroute at a desk. They find out that the voyage they signed for is now something like 2 weeks longer, each way. Contracts stretch. Reliefs get missed. A crew change that was booked for Jeddah now happens somewhere off West Africa, or does not happen at all, and the chief engineer, who was due home in March, goes home in May. That is the first invoice, and it is paid in time rather than money by people whose names appear in no analysis of this event. Roughly 2 million people work at sea on merchant ships. Their working conditions are governed by contract lengths measured in months, and a routing decision taken in an office in Europe rewrites those contracts for thousands of them at once, with no negotiation and no compensation because nothing in the contract was breached. The voyage simply got longer. The second is the toll collector. Egypt operates the canal, and canal revenue sits alongside remittances and tourism as one of the country's significant sources of foreign currency. When the traffic went round Africa, that revenue went with it. And notice the shape of that. The operator of the choke point did nothing wrong. Nothing failed at the canal. It was maintained, deepened, and open every day of the crisis. It lost its income anyway because of conditions in a stretch of sea it does not control. Owning a choke point is not the same as controlling the corridor it sits in. Third, the shipping lines. Fuel for several thousand extra miles. War risk insurance premiums that moved week to week, and a suppler cost that turns out to be the largest one in the system. And the United Nations put an actual number on it using a single route, India to Europe and back. That round trip takes 56 days, and to keep a ship arriving on schedule, you need 8 vessels working it. Stretch the same round trip to 63 days, 1 week longer. Now you need 9. 1 extra week on the calendar, and an entire additional container ship has to appear on that route, or the schedule breaks. Nobody sank anything. Nobody cancelled anything. The arithmetic simply demanded another ship, on that route and on every route like it, all in the same few weeks. So, global container capacity fell without a single vessel being lost. The ships all still existed. They were just each doing less work per year, because they were spending more of the year sailing past Africa. That is why freight rates rose on routes that never went near the Red Sea. The capacity had been drained out from under them. Fourth, the cargo owners. Every extra day at sea is a day of working capital sitting inside a steel box in the middle of the ocean, earning nothing, insured and unavailable. Fifth, retailers, who responded the way anyone responds to a longer and less predictable pipeline. They held more inventory, which costs money and warehouse space and is invisible in every price the public sees. And notice something about that list. Not one of those 5 parties is in a position to fix the problem. The crew cannot reroute. The Canal Authority cannot make a stretch of sea. It does not control SAFE. The lines can only choose which expensive option to take. Every one of them is absorbing a cost created somewhere they have no standing. Which brings us to the 6th party, the one everybody expected to be first. What happened to consumer prices? The answer is the reason this episode exists. Much less than the coverage implied. Ocean freight is a small share of the shelf price of most manufactured goods. So even a large move in the cost of shifting a box changes the price of what is inside it modestly, and late mixed in with a dozen other causes. So the intuitive ranking of victims is upside down. Most people picture the shopper at the front of the queue. The shopper is at the back. By the time the shock reaches a shelf, it has been absorbed 5 times over by a crew, a canal authority, a shipping line, a cargo owner, and a retailer, none of whom appear in the story. Same shape as the bill in last season. Every arrangement that works has one, and the useful question is never how large it is. It is who receives it, and how far they are from whoever got the benefit. And the answer here is uncomfortable. The people who paid most were the people with the least ability to choose. The crew did not vote on the reroute. Egypt did not create the risk and could not remove it. Meanwhile, the buyer of a pair of shoes in Hamburg experienced this event as a delivery estimate, moving by a few days. There is one more cost, and it is the one that lasts after the route reopens. A route is not just water, it is a set of expectations. Schedules, insurance rates, contract terms, the assumption that a box put on a ship in Asia arrives in Europe within a known window. Decades to establish and priced into every supply chain that used them. Once a shipper has spent a year running the long way stops being an emergency and becomes an option. Contracts get written with 2 routings instead of 1. That does not unwind when the water is calm again, which is the real damage to a choke point, not the traffic it lost during the disruption. The customers who learned, at great expense, that they could live without it. Every day the detour operates is a day the world is paying tuition on how to not need you. And the American government publishes a table that proves it. Oil through the Suez Canal and its pipeline, 2023. 8.8 million barrels a day. The following year, 4.8. Round Africa, the long way, the same 2 years. 6.2, then 9.3. Now the line that ends the argument. Total oil moved by sea worldwide across those same 2 years. 80.2 million barrels a day, then 79.7. It fell by half of 1%. The choke point lost nearly half its traffic. The world lost almost nothing. The oil did not stop and nobody went without. It turned left instead of right and paid the extra postage. So, the question season 1 ended on. What actually happens to a choke point when the world decides, all at once and regardless of cost, that it can no longer afford to depend on it? The honest answer is that the finale asked the question slightly wrong, and finding out why is worth the last 3 minutes. It assumed the world would have to decide something. It did not. 3 figures, and the third one is the one that matters. 1. About 6 days. That is the closure everyone remembers, and the system swallowed it. A blocked choke point is a spike. Spikes are survivable because everything downstream already carries buffer for spikes. 2. Roughly half or more for a year. That is what happened when the canal stayed open and the corridor did not. No blockage, no incident at the canal itself, and a far larger loss. Being avoidable turns out to be more dangerous than being blockable. 3. 29%. On the Singapore to Rotterdam run, that is how much shorter the voyage is through the canal than around Africa. Not a strategic figure, a distance. That is the detour, and it sets the price of everything else in this episode. It is what the world turned out to be willing to pay rather than carry the risk. 29% of a voyage. That was the whole of its power. So the answer is not that the choke point collapses. It is quieter than that, and worse. It keeps working. It keeps its infrastructure, its staff, its published tariff, and its place on the map. It simply stops being necessary, and it finds out the way anyone finds out, which is by reading the receipts at the end of the year. And that is where the question needed rewording. There was no moment where the world decided anything, all at once and regardless of cost. There was no summit, no announcement, no coordinated withdrawal. There were a few hundred commercial decisions taken separately over a few weeks by people comparing 2 prices, each of which was entirely reasonable on its own. Which is a more unsettling finding than the dramatic version. A choke point is not dismantled by anybody, it is abandoned by arithmetic. A choke point does not lose its power by being closed. It loses its power on the day the detour becomes tolerable. That is why the shape of this season is going to be the same 8 times. Find the toll, find the detour, measure the distance between them. That number is the power, and it is usually not the number anybody is quoting. And it is worth saying what this framework does not do. It does not tell you when traffic returns, and this episode will not guess. The condition is simply stated. Ships come back when the total cost of the route, risk included, drops below the cost of going around. That is a mechanism, not a forecast, and anybody offering you a date is selling something else. One last thing about Suez, and it is the thing that connects every episode after this one. The canal is artificial. Human beings dug it in the 19th century, and human beings widened it in 2015. Which means its capacity is, in the end, a question of money and time, expensive money and slow time, but the category is engineering. Now hold that against the 2 choke points on the same route we named earlier. Bab al-Mandab at the southern end of the Red Sea. Hormuz carrying oil out of the Gulf. Nobody dug either of those, nobody widened them, nobody can. So what does a country do when its single most important supply line runs through a gap in the map that no amount of money will move? Because there is a strait in Southeast Asia, at its narrowest under 3 kilometers of usable water that carries the majority of the crude oil imported by the second largest economy on Earth. That country has spent 20 years and enormous sums building its way around a piece of geography. Next file, we find out whether any of it is enough. This is the Rise Index. Subscribe and follow where power moves next.